Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading with Tatiana. Today I'm reviewing Swim in the Dark by Tomasz Jedrowski. I unfortunately didn't get a physical copy of this book and I read a e-reader version, but I gave this book a 3 out of 5. My Booktuber Shout today is a channel I came across recently called In Between Books. She has been on Booktube for 2 years now, and I'm actually really surprised she doesn't have a bigger following, but I think it's because she posts what she enjoys, she does full reviews and that kind of stuff, and I really enjoyed her content. So if you want to check out her channel, I'll link it down below. And as always, before I go into my full review, I will always appreciate it if you can hit the subscribe button. If you like this video and my content, please give it a thumbs up. And if you have read this book, or if you have any queer lit recommendations for me, I would love to hear it down below. This book, Swimming in the Dark, is Jedrowski's debut novel. It came out in 2020, and the genre I would put it in is historical fiction set in Poland, and specifically also it is in queer lit or LGBTQ A+ genre as well. A bit about the author, Tomasz Jedrowski. So I thought it was pretty cool because he was actually born in Germany and now he lives in Poland, and he's surfing a national identity and fashion in Poland. And I thought it was pretty cool that learning about this background of his, because this book wasn't a translated book. He actually intentionally decided to write it in English despite his background, which I thought was really cool. I am really curious why he did that, maybe to get a bigger reach, but I think it's really awesome that he chose to write in English intentionally. He does mention he writes in English intentionally because he wants to write in a way that's not like his parents speaking through him, which I thought was a very interesting observation. So yeah, he writes because he feels that English is, I guess, his true language to himself. In his studies, he has earned a degree at Cambridge, and he also had studied at the University of Paris. I also want to mention that even though it's his debut novel, that it was a very hot book because it was part of a 6-way auction through 6 different publishers. So I thought that was super cool, and it became ultimately a 6-figure contract. The premise and the characters in this book. So I'll start with the premise. As I mentioned earlier, this is a historical fiction, and I really enjoyed it because it was set during a time period and also an area of the world that I really have no knowledge of. It's set in Poland in the 1980s in a communist kind of political environment, and basically, as I mentioned before, the genre is also in queer lit. So the main character, Ludwig, it's a coming of age story. I mean, there's so many aspects of this book and so many different genres it falls into, but ultimately I can see it as a coming of age story. So we meet Ludwig, who is our protagonist, and he is a young boy when he's 9. And for me, as someone that identifies as mostly heterosexual, it was really cool that the author did a really good job of putting me as a reader in Ludwig's shoes and just coming to realize at a fairly early age that he has some attraction or some like drawn to other boys in his class. So I thought that was really well written. So basically follow Ludwig, and because it's set in communist Poland, every summer he has to go to agricultural camp where they do hard manual labor, and there at this camp, this is in fast forward a few years in his teenage years, where he meets his Janusz, and here he realizes that him and Janusz have this attraction and desire for each other, and they kind of live their youth up until their 20s and throughout their 20s in this kind of undercover secret love. So that's where the story is set without giving too many spoilers. But one thing that's interesting is the main character, Ludwig. He is very pro-West. At a fairly early age, he has access to the radio, which broadcasts stuff that's actually happening in the rest of the world, specifically the Western Hemisphere, and in countries that have been liberated by the West. And he realizes that being a gay man, that there's more out there. He needs to escape Poland. Janusz, who's his lover, who is presumably gay as well, doesn't see the same thing. He actually has a job working for the government, for the Communist Party, and he believes that, you know, life can get better in Poland. So it's interesting because you would think, because of their sexual orientation or preference, that they would think very similar politically, but actually think very differently. So it causes an interesting divide between the two characters. Other main characters I want to mention is, aside from Ludwig and Janusz, is also Maxio and Hania. Maxio and Hania are brothers and sisters, and they are really well off in communist Poland. I believe their father is like very involved in the Communist Party, and so Janusz actually has a romantic relationship with Hania. So it's kind of interesting to see him have his double life with Ludwig and Hania, but Janusz justifies that he has to do this to be able to have a happy life for him and Ludwig. So for him, he sees it's a means to an end. And I think it's just very interesting because I think when living in a regime like that, you always think if you do one more thing and you have freedom, but it really is never the case, and you're always working towards one more thing. So I thought that was like super interesting. Another character I want to bring up is Carolina, which is Ludwig's, I guess, like best friend and also confidant, and she's important because in their like late teens, I believe, she never says it directly that she thinks he's gay or a homosexual, as the word they used back then, but she brings him to like an underground bar where there's obviously gay men around. So I think it's really cool that she is a character that is there to support him. Common themes in this book. So one thing that was very prevalent throughout the book, because it's set in Poland that's divided amongst everyday people, and with the two main characters, is the idea of East versus West. West has an idea of freedom and you can be independent, where the East is very like communism still, and how the government says they will take care of everyone, but then in the day-to-day, people see that people are suffering or starving or sick and can't even get access to simple medicines to recover. So it's very interesting in this book where you kind of see this divide. And I really like it because, that's why I like historical fiction, because it personifies history. Like, I know history isn't boring, but sometimes it can be dry to read. And you read a book like this, even though it's fictional but set in historic time, it kind of makes you realize how it is for these everyday people, despite them being fictional characters. Another thing I mentioned earlier is the idea of how much you have to do until you get freedom. Are you entitled to it? Do we deserve it as individuals? Or is something we need to work towards? That's something that Janusz, he feels that he has to do this, he has to do one more thing, and then him and Ludwig can be free to be who they want to be. But Ludwig sees it as, no, like they have to leave to get a better future. So I thought that was a very interesting thing that happened throughout the book. Another thing that I thought was interesting was Ludwig actually grew up in the countryside, and he actually goes to the capital city or like one of the big cities to work, and he kind of has this survivor skill because he leaves his mom and his grandma back in the rural countryside, and ultimately Ludwig is able to leave Poland, and he has a bit of guilt because he wants to go visit his grandma one more time before he leaves, but she's like, no, like there's nothing left here, like go off, live your own life. And I just can't imagine, like, if you grew up in a country that was like struggling so hard and you have the opportunity to leave, but not everyone in your family and not all your friends can, what that guilt will do to you. So I thought that was like an interesting topic that maybe wasn't the main topic or one of the main topics in the book, but it really stuck out to me, what Ludwig experienced. Because even though he eventually went to America to gain that freedom, there's so many things from his past that still haunt him, so I thought that was super interesting. As I gave this book a 3 out of 5, there were several things I didn't like. I do want to say there were so many moments in the book that the writing was just so poetic, and that like paragraph by itself would have been a 5 out of 5. But the reasons why I docked 2 points is, and maybe these aren't valid reasons, but it was enough for me to give it a 3, was the first one was the book was way too effing short. It's only like, I think, under 200 pages, or maybe it's like 200 and something, but it's so rich in history and rich in so much conflict between the characters that I just wanted more. I felt because of the brevity of the book and a novel that every character was kind of flat and not developed enough for me to really enjoy, but at my book club they counter that maybe that's why the book is a 5, because it makes you want more. But I don't know, I just felt like the book could have been like double in length, and I was still have felt like it was too short. Another reason I didn't like it was the format of, there's only 7 chapters, but like the first chapter is like 36 pages, but the next chapter is like 70 or 80 pages, which is like a third of the book. So I felt that was kind of like choppy and chaotic, because I know this is a personal preference, but I'm a chapter reader, so I'll usually read until I'm done a chapter before I stop reading for that sitting. And it was just really hard to have 7 chapters only, where one chapter was very short and the next chapter would be like so long. So that was also a -1. And then also, the reason I didn't like this book is because there are moments where the two characters have a bit of lust and passion. And if you've watched my videos, I am just not a fan of any smut. I am a huge fan of it fades to black, or maybe just very non-descriptive words. I don't think I'm a prude in my personal life, but for reading, it just makes me cringe a bit. So one thing I do want to share, because this section actually made me laugh out loud, and it kind of reminds me of the podcast My Dad Wrote a Porno, if you're familiar with it. So the quote is, "Turning around and pulling off your swim shorts, revealing your behind, quickening my pulse. Your ass was powerful, like two great smooth rocks sculpted by the sea." Like, come on, how can I read that and not laugh? And it was just a bit too cringe for me. Reasons I liked this book was it's my first time being exposed to this part of history in this area, and I just really loved it. I wish we learn more about each character, even like the people like Maskio and Hania, whose family is very involved with the Communist Party. I thought I would hate them, but I didn't. Like, every character in this book, I was able to find aspects to like. And I'm just like, I don't know what's going to happen to them, but I just, wish the best for their life. So I really like that part about the book. I also love, as I said before, there are several passages in the book where Ludwig describes his encounters with Janusz, and just the writing was, oh my god, so great. Like, the love and the connection and like their passion for each other is just really beautiful, and I really think this book was written really well. Well, on Goodreads, this book got an average of 4.24 out of 5, and I would agree with that. I'll start with bad reviews as always. People didn't like the style of the book, probably similar to me, about the chapters and maybe the writing style, which I could see. I did feel like the writing style wasn't like consistent throughout the book. Like I said, there were parts of it I was like, oh, that's really poetic, and there were parts of it like, ooh, that was really smutty. So I can agree with that. People also felt, and I disagree with this, but people felt that it was very flat and it was very easy to predict the plot. I would disagree with that. However, having said that, I'm not someone that when I read a book or watch a movie, I try to predict the ending. I just take it as it comes. So I can see why people may say that if that's true to them. And then another reason why people don't like it is the book is mostly set in Poland, but it's told in a way that Ludwig is writing a letter to Janusz in the future. So the book is strange in that it will jump between present and past without warning, not even like a paragraph break. So sometimes you'll have to like reread and go back and be like, oh wait, where are they now? Good reviews on Goodreads is people love the love story between Janusz and Ludwig. They felt it was mesmerizing, they felt it was beautiful, they felt it was heartbreaking, just all of it in one. I think a lot of people in the queer community really love this book because it it spotlighted queer relationships in mainstream, I guess, media or literature, and also people love the setting in communist Poland at the brink of collapse. Why I believe you should read this book. I think you should read it if you love queer reads, if you love historical fiction, if you love romance, this book is for you. Now I'll share how this book made me feel, because one of my favorite things to ask people is how a book made them feel if they recommend a book to me, because if you ask me a week, a year, 5 years from now, I probably won't remember what a book really was about, but I remember how it made me feel. So this book, Swimming in the Dark by Tomasz Jedrowski, it made me feel very torn and sad for these two men. Like, growing up in a country where homosexuality isn't accepted, especially in the 80s back then, and having to live in secret and not just being able to live your full self, it just makes me sad. And I know it's fictional, but I know that this was true for lots of men and women back then, and also right now in our modern world. So yeah, it just makes me sad, and I know it makes me feel very lucky that I live where I am. Thank you for watching until the end of my book review. I always appreciate it. If you read this book, Swimming in the Dark by Tomasz Jedrowski, please comment down below what did you think. And if you want to join me next time, I have started The Do-Over by Bethany Turner. This is a contemporary romance recommended by Liza's bookshelf. She actually recommended Plot Twist, but wasn't available at my library, but this was next to it, so I picked this one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.